Las Vegas once had buffets that felt like the city's greatest gift, a place where anyone could eat well without worrying about the price. Today, those same buffets are disappearing fast, and the ones still standing cost more than most families can handle. What caused this collapse isn't luck or rising costs. It started with a decision hidden behind bright lights and friendly signs, a decision that changed the entire city without most people noticing. And once you understand how it happened, you may never look at Las Vegas the same way again. The fall of the Vegas buffet didn't begin with empty trays or high prices, but with a quiet shift in thinking, where casino leaders started seeing meals not as gifts to visitors, but as costs that needed to be squeezed for every possible dollar. People who grew up visiting these buffets remember plates stacked with food they loved, yet the real magic came from the feeling that the city cared about giving regular people a fair deal, something that made each visit feel personal and welcoming. As new owners stepped in, the old belief in generosity began to fade, and the idea of offering guests a meal worth remembering slowly turned into a calculation of how much could be charged without pushing people away too quickly. Families who once spent afternoons at buffets noticed changes creeping in, starting with longer lines, smaller selections, and a sense that the places built for everyone were quietly turning into something designed only for those who could pay more. The transformation became easier to see as the classic buffets that once stretched across the city began to shut their doors, leaving locals and visitors looking for the comfort they used to find in a simple, affordable meal. Some visitors tried convincing themselves that rising prices made sense, but the increases didn't match the shrinking portions or missing dishes, and the entire experience felt different in a way they couldn't fully explain. Long before the closures, casino floors changed from lively gathering spots to polished spaces built around strategies that pushed guests towards spending more, while the buffets, once symbols of care, were treated as unnecessary leftovers from another era. People who visited year after year noticed that even the busiest buffets felt off, as staff worked harder with fewer resources, and the warm, comforting atmosphere that made those rooms special started disappearing under corporate pressure. By the time the shutdown arrived, buffets were labeled as temporary losses, but the reality revealed itself quickly when many never reopened, replaced by expensive food halls that looked exciting but took away the shared tables people loved. These new food halls offered fancy signs and stylish vendors, yet visitors soon realized they were paying far more for smaller portions, while losing the chance to sit together and enjoy a relaxed shared experience that buffets always delivered. Locals felt the change more than anyone because buffets had been their steady weekend tradition, a place where families could eat without stress and celebrate moments that didn't require a reservation or a careful look at the bill. When the last affordable buffets closed, people were left with places that charged premium prices for simple meals, creating a divide that made many feel like the city had forgotten the everyday visitor who built those traditions. Travelers who once planned entire trips around their favorite buffets now walked through casinos surprised by how much things had changed, wondering how a simple meal had turned into something they needed to budget for carefully. Families who used to enjoy 2 or 3 buffets during a single trip found themselves choosing none because the cost of a single dinner could compete with what they once paid for an entire weekend's worth of eating. Even the buffets that survived raised their prices to levels that didn't match the experience, leaving people confused about what they were paying for as the selections shrank and the feeling of abundance faded. Visitors noticed missing seafood nights, smaller carving stations, and desserts that looked far simpler than before, making it clear that the spirit of generosity that built these buffets had been replaced with a focus on extracting maximum profit. Year after year, more visitors skipped buffets entirely, not because they stopped caring, but because the cost felt disconnected from the comfort and community that once made these places a highlight of every trip. People who once loved returning to the same buffet found themselves searching for alternatives, only to face crowded food halls where finding a seat together felt like a challenge instead of a welcoming part of the experience. As these changes spread, the city shifted into something less warm, with every corner designed to guide people toward higher spending, while the simple pleasure of gathering around a shared table faded into memory. Even visitors who accepted the rising prices noticed the loss of that familiar sense of comfort, realizing that the buffet wasn't just about food but about feeling included at a table that welcomed everyone equally. Some casinos still held on to the idea of value, but many visitors only found them by chance, tucked away from the noise of the Strip, carrying quiet reminders of a time when serving guests meant more than increasing revenue. These few surviving buffets continued offering meals at prices people could handle, keeping traditions alive for locals who relied on them not just for food, but for the sense of community they created. Guests who stepped into these remaining spots felt the difference right away, noticing friendly staff, familiar faces, and a calm environment that focused on comfort instead of pushing them toward higher spending. Visitors who discovered these buffets realized they were experiencing something rare, a piece of old Las Vegas where the goal wasn't to squeeze every dollar, but to give people a space where they felt welcome and valued. These places remind people that the spirit of Las Vegas isn't gone, only harder to find, and that choosing these buffets keeps the older traditions alive, allowing visitors and locals to protect a part of the city that once meant so much. People walking the Strip saw the bright lights and new restaurants, yet many felt a quiet sense of loss, because the simple comfort of sharing one long table with friends and strangers was disappearing in ways that didn't match the city they remembered. Some travelers tried the new food halls, hoping they would replace the old feeling, but moving between separate vendors and separate prices created a scattered experience that lacked the unity a buffet always provided, leaving people longing for what once felt effortless. Parents found themselves missing the ease of letting everyone choose what they wanted without stress, a freedom that made buffets feel like the perfect place for mixed tastes and tight budgets, making the shift toward pricier meals even more frustrating. Visitors who returned after a few years away were shocked by how quickly the landscape had changed, walking past closed buffet spaces that now held high-priced vendors offering meals once included in far cheaper spreads. Many wondered how a city built on generosity turned toward a model that felt more controlled, where each choice came with a higher price tag, and the warm communal moments that once defined the buffet experience were replaced by brief individual transactions. The shift didn't just affect tourists, because locals who relied on buffets for weekly gatherings suddenly had to search far outside the Strip to find the few remaining places where large families could still share affordable meals without straining their monthly budgets. Older visitors spoke about the years when buffets were the highlight of every trip, remembering the excitement of exploring endless food stations, a feeling that now lived only in their memory as the city moved further away from that sense of abundance. These memories often came with stories of celebrations where entire families gathered at one table, something the new food options rarely allowed since each person ordered separately and often ended up sitting far apart in busy, crowded halls. Visitors who saw their favorite buffets replaced by upscale vendors sensed that the city was shifting toward guests with deeper pockets, leaving behind the people who once filled those rooms and brought life to the long buffet lines. The few buffets that remained felt pressure from every direction, balancing rising costs with the desire to keep traditions alive, making each visit feel important because people sensed they were supporting something rare and worth protecting. Guests who walked into these surviving locations noticed the familiar comfort they had missed, from the warm lighting to the steady flow of families choosing food together, creating an atmosphere that reminded them of what Vegas once stood for. These buffets became safe havens for visitors seeking more than a meal, offering a space where tourists and locals still gathered without feeling pushed toward high-priced menus that stripped away the joy of eating freely. People who discovered these places often shared stories of how each visit felt like stepping back into a time when generosity shaped the city's personality, reminding them that not everything needed to be redesigned around profit alone. Travelers following online reviews found themselves grateful for the rare locations still offering fair value, noting how these hidden gems managed to keep portions large, selections varied, and prices balanced without losing the spirit of community. These buffets attracted visitors who wanted the experience they grew up with, creating a mix of nostalgia and appreciation that kept them returning despite the growing number of trendy spots trying to pull attention away. People noticed that the staff at these buffets treated guests with genuine warmth, something that reminded them of earlier times when casinos valued repeat visitors and prioritized comfort over squeezing money from every small moment. Guests realized that these surviving buffets weren't trying to impress with flashy designs or exaggerated presentations, focusing instead on simple, filling meals that made people feel welcome and respected, an approach many felt was disappearing from the main Strip. Families often left these spots talking about how refreshing it felt to enjoy a meal without stress, knowing that everyone found something they liked while staying within a reasonable budget, a luxury in a city growing more expensive each year. The contrast between old and new became clearer when visitors moved from these buffets to the Strip's costlier areas, where even basic meals cost far more and came without the warmth that buffets naturally created. People frequently shared their experiences online, explaining how the remaining buffets captured a piece of Vegas history that shouldn't disappear, encouraging others to support them before the last vestiges of that tradition vanished under corporate pressure. Visitors who followed these suggestions found themselves grateful for the recommendation, because these buffets helped them reconnect with a version of Vegas that felt honest, friendly, and focused on giving guests a memorable experience without draining their wallets. Some travelers described feeling a quiet relief, knowing that the original spirit of the city wasn't completely gone, held in place by these few buffets that stayed committed to serving everyone, instead of narrowing their audience to wealthier crowds. Guests who returned multiple times noticed that these buffets rarely changed their approach, sticking to simple, reliable meals that comforted people in a way the new high-priced food halls could never replicate, no matter how polished they appeared. Many visitors felt a sense of responsibility to support these buffets, realizing that their choices helped decide whether these places would continue existing or eventually disappear like the many others that once defined the city's identity. The continued excitement around these few buffets proved that people still cared about value and community, sending a message that Las Vegas didn't need to abandon its roots and that the old spirit could survive if enough people chose to keep it alive. People who paid attention to the city's changes recognized that buffets were more than dining rooms because they held memories of easy afternoons, shared celebrations, and simple moments that made Las Vegas feel welcoming to anyone who walked through its doors. Visitors often talked about how buffets created a natural meeting point, giving families and friends a comfortable place to gather, something the modern food halls struggled to offer because they pushed everyone towards separate lines and separate bills. As the city leaned harder into luxury pricing, guests realized that buffets once balanced the high costs of shows and hotels, giving people a way to enjoy themselves without worrying about stretching their budgets beyond what felt reasonable. Travelers who looked back on older trips remembered how freeing it felt to enjoy a full meal without counting dollars, a freedom that slowly disappeared as prices rose and portions shrank throughout the city's newer dining options. Locals who worked in hospitality understood the shift clearly, explaining how corporate strategies focused on squeezing value from every inch of the property, leaving little room for the generous approach that once made buffets a beloved tradition. Guests who returned after several years often felt surprised by how different the atmosphere had become, noticing the polished surfaces and higher costs that overshadowed the relaxed charm that once defined the city's buffet culture. These changes encouraged visitors to search harder for the remaining buffets, treating them almost like hidden landmarks worth finding, because discovering one that still cared about fairness felt like uncovering a rare piece of old Las Vegas. People who found these buffets cherished the familiar sounds of trays sliding, stations opening, and families sharing quiet moments together, a rhythm that reminded them why buffets once held such an important place in the city's identity. Many guests noticed that these surviving locations attracted people from all walks of life, creating a mix of tourists, locals, and repeat visitors who enjoyed the calm pace and friendly nature that buffets naturally encouraged. These buffets became symbols of what the city used to represent, because they focused on giving guests an experience that felt honest and grounded instead of pushing them toward high spending at every turn of their visit. Travelers who supported these buffets liked knowing their money helped maintain something meaningful, giving them a sense of participation in protecting a part of Las Vegas that was slowly being overshadowed by higher-priced dining trends. Guests who returned year after year often shared how these buffets helped anchor their trips, offering a familiar comfort that balanced the fast pace of the city and made each stay feel more connected and enjoyable. People talked about how these buffets reminded them of the city's original charm, because they didn't rely on fancy decorations or hard selling, focusing instead on steady service, fair pricing, and warm hospitality. Some travelers realized the value of these buffets only after experiencing the sharp costs of modern venues, realizing that a simple, comfortable meal shared with loved ones often created stronger memories than anything bought at a premium. These buffets stood out because they gave guests time to relax, offering a space where no one felt rushed or pressured, allowing families to enjoy a meal together without worrying about extra charges or strict time limits. People who explored the city for affordable meals realized quickly that these buffets were becoming rare, and that supporting them helped keep alive a type of experience that once allowed everyone to feel included. Visitors who had never experienced the golden age of buffets learned through these remaining spots what made them special, discovering the sense of community that grew naturally when people gathered around large shared tables. These buffets helped guests understand that the original purpose of the city went beyond entertainment and gambling, because it once aimed to give people a taste of comfort they couldn't always find at home. People often left these buffets, feeling grateful that places like this survived, carrying with them a small reminder that Las Vegas still had corners where hospitality mattered more than profit margins. Visitors appreciated how these buffets managed to remain true to their roots, offering a consistent experience even as the city around them shifted into a marketplace filled with luxury dining and higher expectations for spending. These buffets also showed that people still cared deeply about value, because guests willingly traveled off the strip or out of their way to support a dining experience that felt honest and welcoming. Travelers often compared the comfort they felt in these buffets to the rushed energy found in the city's newer venues, noting how the relaxed atmosphere encouraged real connection that modern food halls rarely provided. Families who visited these spots found it easier to talk, share stories, and enjoy each other's company, because no one was distracted by separate vendors or pressed by high prices that created unnecessary tension. Guests who returned home after visiting these buffets often described them as highlights of their trip, not because they were extravagant, but because they offered a rare blend of comfort, fairness, and tradition in a constantly changing city. The growing appreciation for these buffets signaled that people still wanted the sense of togetherness they once represented, proving that even in a city focused on profit, there remained a strong desire for experiences built on value and genuine care. Visitors who explored these buffets later realized they were experiencing something deeper than a simple meal, because each plate carried pieces of a city that once built its reputation on making average people feel welcome and valued without asking for anything extra. People often reflected on how these buffets helped balance out the intense energy of the Strip, giving them a calm moment where the pressure to spend faded and they could simply enjoy being part of a shared tradition that once shaped the city's character. Guests who paid attention noticed that these remaining buffets had regulars who visited frequently, creating a steady rhythm of familiar faces that made the atmosphere feel warm, something the new dining trends struggled to reproduce. Some visitors realized that without these buffets, the city risked losing more than affordable meals because it risked losing a piece of its identity, an identity built on generosity, accessibility, and the promise that everyone deserved a moment of comfort. Families who experienced these buffets during trips often talked afterward about how grateful they felt discovering a place that still respected their budgets, showing them that Las Vegas didn't need to be expensive to leave meaningful memories. People who followed the trends of the city saw how every new opening focused on higher spending, and this made the surviving buffets feel even more precious, because they resisted the shift towards squeezing guests for profit at every turn. Guests who cared about preserving traditions realized that each visit was a small act of support, helping these buffets stay alive despite growing pressure to raise prices or convert into more profitable formats that remove the communal experience. Travelers who found these buffets often discovered they offered more than decent food, because they served as reminders that the city once cared about creating spaces where people could gather without worrying about the cost. Many visitors explained how these buffets allowed them to reconnect with the simple joy of choosing food freely, sitting together, and relaxing without needing to calculate the price of every bite, something modern venues rarely allowed. People who valued experiences over trends felt drawn to these buffets because they provided a sense of stability, offering a familiar escape from the constant push toward high-priced entertainment that dominated most of the Strip. Guests talked about how these buffets felt more human, because they weren't built around maximizing revenue, but around giving visitors space to breathe, choose, and enjoy their meals at a pace that didn't revolve around sales targets. Those who followed the history of the city understood that buffets represented one of the last pieces of the original Las Vegas mindset, a mindset built on giving people value so they felt appreciated enough to return. Visitors who supported these buffets took pride in knowing they were helping preserve something future travelers might never experience if these places vanished, motivating them to share recommendations with others, hoping to keep the tradition alive. Some travelers even planned their trips around these remaining buffets, treating them as important stops because they offered something rare in a city filled with distractions, honest value, and a chance to enjoy a meal without financial stress. People who visited multiple buffets noticed how each one carried a slightly different charm, but all shared the same core idea of community and fairness, reminding guests of how unified the city once felt before corporate strategies reshaped its priorities. Those who compared older visits to newer ones saw how the disappearance of buffets mirrored the city's overall transformation, shifting away from generosity toward a polished system built around extracting maximum spending at every opportunity. Visitors who paid attention to these changes felt that supporting the surviving buffets was a quiet way to push back against the growing trend of overpricing, showing that people still valued experiences grounded in fairness. Guests appreciated that these buffets remained approachable, allowing people from all income levels to enjoy the same meal, something increasingly rare in a city where dining often came with higher and higher expectations for spending. People often left these buffets with a renewed sense of connection to the city, realizing that even though much had changed, there were still corners where the original spirit survived and continued shaping meaningful experiences. Visitors who talked with staff learned how hard these buffets worked to stay open, balancing rising costs with the desire to serve loyal customers, making guests feel even more eager to support them. Many travelers explained how these buffets became the highlight of their visits, not because they offered luxury, but because they offered honesty, comfort, and a sense of belonging that the newer dining options often lacked. People who understood the city's history knew that buffets symbolized the welcoming heart of Vegas, showing visitors that they didn't need deep pockets to feel appreciated, and this made their decline feel personal to those who loved them. Guests leaving the remaining buffets often felt a mix of gratitude and sadness, knowing that each visit was a reminder of how much the city had changed while also showing that its original warmth still lived in a few protected spaces. Those who visited these buffets regularly believed their choices mattered, because supporting them helped shape the future of the city, proving that people still cared about fairness and didn't want every experience dictated by high prices. When people looked back on their trips, they often realized that the surviving buffets represented more than meals, because they carried the last pieces of a tradition that made Las Vegas feel accessible and welcoming, reminding everyone that value still mattered.